I am Francisco Javier Espinosa-Garcia, professor at the Instituto de Investigaciones en Ecosistemas y Sustentabilidad at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Everyone can relate to the magical moments associated with gathering friends and family around the table, surrounded by tantalizing aromas and delicious, colorful foods and beverages. How can we forget the flavors of these gatherings, including those of our childhood? For me, this is the pungent taste of celery and spicy foods, or the characteristic flavors of almonds and walnuts. The aromas of freshly baked bread and meat seasoned with pepper, garlic, and chili pepper are unforgettable. Many of these foods provide essential nutrients needed to maintain our health. However, most of those flavors, colors, stimulants, and aromas come from chemical substances that go far beyond the essential nutrients you see on a food label. Many of these substances are found naturally occurring in foods and beverages. In technical jargon, they are called natural products or secondary metabolites. So far, more than 200,000 secondary metabolites are known in the arsenal of nearly 350,000 plant species and hundreds of thousands of microbial species, mainly bacteria and fungi. Many other chemical compounds we find in food are human-made or concentrated substances that are added or acquired during food and beverages production, handling, preservation, distribution, packing, and marketing processes. These include food additives to prevent spoiling, enhance flavors, artificial sweeteners, colorants, pesticides, and antibiotic residues, and chemical transfer to food by packaging materials. Some of these may have beneficial or neutral effects, but many may be potentially harmful. But first, to understand the secondary metabolites and other chemicals that are accidentally or intentionally added to food, we must consider that the plants and animals that produce our food have been domesticated from wild relatives that had to defend themselves against competitors, predators, parasites, and pathogens. We must also understand how these plants and animals have co-evolved with bacteria, fungi, and animals in ecological systems. In all cases, it is necessary to understand the evolutionary processes involved in the struggle for the existence of the species of food we eat today. Plants, as primary producers, require defenses that help prevent them from being eaten, promote pollination and seed dispersal, and traits that exclude their competitors. Each plant faces dozens of environmental threats simultaneously, including heterotrophs, which are organisms that cannot produce their own food that try to feed on the plant. One of the main defense types are secondary metabolites, molecules that affect the integrity and vital functions of heterotrophic cells. Heterotrophs, in turn, have evolved sophisticated counter-defenses that neutralize, modify, or degrade secondary metabolites. These interactions favor the evolution of offensive or defensive traits in the Darwinian struggle for existence. The defensive counter-defensive interactions lead to the so-called arms race. Humans are involved in two coevolutionary arms races. The first relates to the domestication of plants, animals, and microbes for human consumption. and the other is between humans and the pests and pathogens mediated by widespread use of antibiotics and pesticides in food production. Both have significant implications for the chemical compositions of the foods we eat. The domestication of plants reduced the allocation of resources to plant defenses and increased the allocation to enhancing the parts we consume, such as seeds, leaves, stems, roots, or fruits. This exchange could only be sustained because humans defend plants by manipulating the biotic and abiotic environment and diversifying the natural resistance of crops to major pests in their agroecosystems. In traditional agricultural systems, crops retain defenses essential for survival in agroecosystems. Here, you see a diagram of the many ecological interactions between maize and the other species in its environment, many of which are mediated by secondary metabolites. Maize and all associated species form a holobiont in which changes in the chemical makeup of maize can affect many maize-associated species. Just as plants co-evolve with their environment, humans evolve the physiological adaptations that reduce or eliminate undesirable plant compounds by processing our cooking foods before the invention of agriculture. Humans also benefited from the many health-promoting compounds in these foods. For example, resveratrol in red grapes is an excellent antioxidant for us, but its role from an ecological perspective is to protect the grapes from microbes. People who domesticated plants and animals manage their agroecosystems in an integrated manner, adapting them to environmental fluctuations. They cultivated polycultures that produced various different crops and products which directly met the family's food needs, with the surplus going to the community by selling or bartering. In this type of ecosystem, natural enemies of pests and pathogens are fostered. Cultural practices are also used to avoid or reduce the impact on pests and pathogens, and the natural heterogeneity is managed properly. The Industrial Revolution led to the migration of people to cities, which meant that fewer people had to farm, and the urban population had to be fed. This led to mechanized agriculture, which, together with the invention of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and hybrid grain seeds of the Green Revolution, increased the productivity of the countryside through industrialized practices that promoted monocultures or the cultivation of a single crop. Farm animals are kept in large concentrations to increase productivity and facilitate the industrializations of their products. Production units specialize in one type of animal to obtain one type of product, such as dairy products, beef, eggs, chicken, or turkey meat, pork, etc. These production systems are designed for homogeneity of growing conditions for crops and livestock to produce homogeneous products. Agroecosystems were shifted to monoculture of one crop or type of animal product with a profit-driven industrial approach. Plant or animal health obstacles are dealt with separately by special pesticides, drugs, or genetic improvement and genetic engineering of crops or livestock. Food and beverages are processed and distributed far from where they are grown. They become part of a corporate-controlled food system that needs food additives and packaging to preserve and market their products. The result is a shift from an arms race through diffuse coevolution between crops and their antagonists, mediated by secondary metabolites, in biodiverse agroecosystems where artificial and natural selection operate simultaneously on crop variants. And we shifted to an arms race between humans and pests and pathogens mediated by pesticides, antibiotics, or genetic manipulation of domesticated species in agricultural systems with very low or no biodiversity, the pests and pathogens will sooner or later develop resistance to antibiotics and pesticides or crop monocultures of resistant varieties. And I can say that pests and pathogens will win the race unless we change our current practices and move towards sustainable food systems. The loss of ecosystem diversity and the widespread adoption of industrialized agricultural practices have reduced plants' natural ability to mount chemical defenses and interact with beneficial organisms, resulting in lower phytochemical diversity in modern farming systems. Additionally, food and beverages contain a wide variety of human-made chemicals and can be contaminated by plasticizers such as bisphenols, phthalates, and microplastics, or other molecules in packaging materials like bottles, cans, plastic trays, plastic films, etc. In summary, the transformation of food system has brought significant advances in crop and livestock productivity, along with increased year-round food availability, low prices for consumers, and practical packaging and changes in lifestyles. However, it came at a high price. Agri-food and livestock production systems are addicted to pesticides, antibiotics, and food additives that result in biodiversity loss, soil loss, pest and pathogens resistant to antibiotic and pesticides, and chemicals that may detrimentally impact human and environmental health. Industrial agriculture and food systems also reduce the diversity and amounts of secondary metabolites in the foods we eat, diminishing plants' natural defenses and many of the health-promoting chemicals they produce. The decline in phytochemical composition, marked by the decrease in the diversity and quantities of secondary metabolites, coupled with the introduction of many human-made exogenous and human-concentrated natural compounds such as high-density fructose, saturated fats, or refined sugars and flours, have important implications for human nutrition and health. Agroecological systems, by maintaining higher biodiversity and promoting more natural plant-environmental interactions, tend to produce nutrition and diverse food richer in beneficial compounds and lower in exogenous chemicals. We know that to counter the impacts of industrialized agriculture on the chemical composition of our foods, we need to increase biodiversity in the productive systems. We need to lower the reliance on pesticides, antibiotics, and synthetic chemicals. We need to move towards agroecological food systems to foster sustainable societies. And to do this, we need to increase knowledge and evidence of what's in our food, good and bad, and the negative consequences of the dominant food system, to convince governments, multinational corporations, and the public to promote healthy food produced without damaging people and the environment.